DePauw's tradition of higher education serves as an informative and interesting background for this afternoon's discussion. Joining us now is your host, Matt Patterson.
Good afternoon and welcome to Outlook. Today we'd like to focus our attention on the liberal arts education with DePauw University in particular. We're happy to have as our guest today President Richard Rosser, who will share some of his views on the liberal arts education. President Rosser, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. With the rising cost of tuition at DePauw University, one would wonder as to the questions why. Could you possibly elaborate on some of your views?
Well, I'm not surprised you asked that question because a lot of people do. The first reason, of course, for rising costs is simply the rate of inflation. And that is something none of us have any control over. As a matter of fact, I was asked this very question yesterday in the fraternity house here on campus. Why the increase? And the first concern is that if we had no increase in tuition, we would not be able to give an increase in pay to our faculty and staff.
Right.
We are what is commonly called a labor-intensive industry, in the sense that 65% of our budget goes to pay faculty and staff. And again, that's why you all are here, because you want to be in an institution where you have a high-quality faculty supported by first-rate staff people, and that costs money. And these people have to have salary increases and wage increases, just as does anyone else. Or to put it another way, because of inflation, our costs have to go up. The alternative, for example, would be to give no one here at DePauw any kind of a wage or salary increase in a given year. You can imagine how popular that would be.
Right.
You could get away with it about 1 year. The other thing that you might do, of course, would be to reduce the size of the faculty and staff. But yet again, students are here because they want to have a high-quality faculty and enough faculty so that they can get the kind of personal attention for which you are paying. I might note that costs are going up in state schools this year also, approximately the same percentage rate that our costs are going up. And I just received this morning a list of the tuition increases at the Great Lakes Colleges Association schools, of which we are a member.
Right.
And even though our tuition is high, we are number 8 out of 12 in terms of the actual cost. So we're still, in comparative terms, I think a very good buy if you are looking for a high-quality education.
As a senior, I certainly can understand it, and I can vouch for the fact that we do have an excellent faculty here at DePauw University.
Yeah, and we've just got to keep this because if we didn't have it, why would people then come? And I think the larger question is it really worth the difference, let's say, between attending here and going to a large state school? Well, frankly, even though the difference is considerable, I have always felt that the quality of the education at a school like this is just that much better. And it doesn't have as much to do with faculty. They have very good faculty at Indiana University, for example. It's just the fact that things are done on a different scale. Largeness, when you're talking about 20 or 30,000 students, there are just things that we do that they cannot do.
Could you possibly go into detail on some of the things that DePauw University can do that a larger university does not have the possibility to do?
Well, as a matter of fact, I was again talking with a man this morning who was commenting that the parents of one of our students, right? The student happens to be a senior today.
Right.
This man is very highly placed in a major corporation in Chicago. And he was saying the extraordinary thing is when people ask me, well, what's the difference between DePauw and a larger school? He said, I can pick up the telephone and call a professor at DePauw who has my daughter in class, and not only does that professor know my daughter, the professor knows what my daughter's grades are, how she's doing, all kinds of detail about her and her situation. Whereas, try that at Indiana University.
Right.
Just try calling a professor.
Sure.
It's just an entirely different kind of approach to education. There you have mass education in effect, and the other thing you have at a large school, and again, Indiana University, for its kind of school, is excellent. you have a very large graduate school, and inevitably, much of the attention is given to the graduate students. And the graduate students, in turn, are doing much of the undergraduate teaching, whereas here, you have full-time faculty, almost all with PhDs, if a PhD is required in their field. And in a few cases where we bring in faculty to replace someone on a sabbatical, these people usually either have their doctorate or are very close to it. So it's just an entirely different emphasis. We emphasize undergraduate education with a full-time faculty committed to teaching, a faculty interested in research. But our faculty does not get tenure based upon whether or not it's published a book in that given year. We're most of all interested in what kind of teachers they are, what they do in the classroom, and furthermore, whether they really care about you as a student, as an individual,
Right.
not just as an enrollment unit or someone who has to be in their class in order for them to get enough students to keep their job.
I think that class size, the small classes, says a lot
Yeah.
for DePauw, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And of course, as you know, we have a current debate here as to whether or not there are a few courses which might not be taught better if we had a larger number of students in them. And it's interesting the numbers we're talking about. We're talking perhaps about a class of 90 students as being a large class. When you get to a large university, they're talking about large classes of 500. So again, it's just an entirely different kind of scale. But I think the most important thing here is that our faculty members really are interested in you as individuals, will talk with you outside of class, are concerned about where you've come from, what you are doing here at school, and what you intend to do. And I would guess that you have found faculty members like that. Not all faculty members will show that interest, but I think any student here will become quite close friends with several faculty, and again, may know 50 or 60 other faculty.
Certainly.
And it's a community kind of feeling which you can't find at larger institutions.
Right. Could you possibly go into detail on what the alumni at DePauw, and what they mean, and the alumni process, possibly?
Well, you'll be an alumnus, of course.
Right, very
pretty
soon.
Quickly. That's right. Well, I think first of all, the alumni at the school really make the reputation of the
Right.
school. It's what they do and where they go. And for a school of this size, we have, I would say, an absolutely extraordinary group of alumni in terms of what they've achieved and what they have done. And secondly, they are extremely supportive. They're almost fanatical about the school. Sometimes it's embarrassing. They think that we have no problems, or that everyone who graduates from here is fabulously successful. Well, it's not quite like that. But if you look at the achievements of our people, it's absolutely extraordinary. Now, the third thing is, and I don't know how much current students understand this, even though our tuition is a lot of money, because of the support our alumni have given over the years in terms of adding to the endowment, in terms of buildings, in terms of the alumni fund, in effect they are providing a subsidy of about $3,000 per year, which has to be added on to what you pay. Let's
Right,
assume you
yes.
pay full tuition. That has to be added on here. Or to put it another way, the tuition, or the real cost of your education here is probably more like $8,000 or $9,000 a year. But the tuition people will pay here next year, for example, is about $5,400. So the alumni have added on all that additional money. All of our buildings have been built with gifts from alumni or friends. The new Phys Ed Center, $7.2 million. That's all coming from alumni or friends. The renovation of East College, $2.5 million project, all from alumni or friends. Not 1 cent is taken out of our tuition dollars to provide all of the capital improvements around here. Or to put it another way, each generation really is going to school based on what the previous generation and previous generations have given to the school, just because they believe so much in the kind of education that is done here. And of course, your class and subsequent classes will depend upon you to do the same thing. for future generations. Because what we have here is something, it's very spatial, and it's of a very spatial kind of quality in terms of education. And all those students, when they graduate, they may think, well, look what I paid. I don't have another cent. Certainly they made all kinds of profit from me, but then 5 or 10 years after they get out, then they begin to think, well, yes, I begin to see what has happened. And then I think the most extraordinary thing is that in the last several years, the senior class, of course, is beginning to think through this. And last year, the senior class made what is an all-time national record in terms of participation in the senior gift drive. Dartmouth called us up to find out how we did it. They've never been able to do this. So last year was an all-time record. 83% of the students participated. This year's class, as you know, they decided to beat the all-time national record. Now they're coming very close, but I mean, look at what they're trying to do. They're trying to beat the all-time record. I think they're up to 81%. They haven't quite made 83. But on the other hand, they've raised more money than the class raised last year. So even though their participation is not quite as high, they now have an all-time record in terms of giving. Well, this says something, you see. This is dramatic evidence of the way our students, before they've even graduated, the way they feel about this institution.
I know that I participated in it. It really does say something about the spirit of the school.
Oh, it does. It's just astounding. I didn't think you all could do it, but this, of course, is something I can talk about whenever I talk to alumni
Right.
or people from any other school. They just don't believe it. They cannot believe that we have this kind of extraordinary spirit and dedication and motivation even before you leave here. And if we can keep this going with each senior class, we will build in a kind of understanding and dedication to this school, which ought to keep it going for at least another 100 years.
With the dividedness, the separation with this fraternities and sorority system, yet the students still pull together in such drives such as this. What do you account for that?
Well, again, I think one of the secrets of this institution is that we have these extraordinary loyalties to fraternities and sororities and to residence halls. The old Men's Hall Association, which goes way back into the 1930s and perhaps even before that, has an extraordinary loyalty. These were the independent men students at that time. That was lost for a few years, but I think now that's coming back in terms of the independent students. Well, in any case, it's interesting that most other colleges try to recreate this kind of a pattern because they know that it's difficult to give people a sense of belonging if the group is too large. So what you try to do in most larger schools, you try to break students down into smaller residence halls, co-ops, what have you. And they try to create the same kind of spirit that we achieve here in a very natural way through the fraternities and sororities and through our own residence halls. So it's a building block, if you will. Now, what you want to do then is to take the loyalty, which is to these small groups, and have that loyalty also develop to the school itself. Now, sometimes I see examples of where I think the loyalty to a particular fraternity and sorority may be just a little too much, and they may forget the university in the process. But I think we do it here rather well. In other words, we have this intense competition among living units throughout the whole year. But then, in turn, this competition helps, for example, in the senior gift drive. And why was the senior gift drive possible? Because of the competition among units. But on the other hand, they weren't giving just because of the competition. They also were giving because of their feeling of belonging to DePauw itself. So you have loyalty on both levels, and I think it really complements and supplements this other group.
You've expressed some opinions on the liberal arts education, and I know you have a lot more feelings on this. I graduate this year. What can I do with my degree that someone else cannot do? What contacts do I have? What can I do with this liberal arts education?
Well, I think, again, part of the problem we always run into when we're talking about college is that there probably is too much emphasis in terms of what do you do for your first job or preparing for your first job. Whereas college only makes sense if you're preparing someone for the rest of their life. And you and your colleagues, for example, in your generation, you probably are going to have maybe half a dozen jobs. You are going to have perhaps 2 or 3 major career changes during your life. And the worst thing for us to do would be to prepare you for a specific job. So the first thing is we've got to give you the basic kind of abilities to handle a variety of situations. Now, and I think the next point is that almost anyone who comes here by definition is already in an elite group in terms of ability and potential for leadership. And you are going to be a leader wherever you go. You just are, because you've been here, you have a certain kind of background, you're preparing for that. So, not only are you preparing for a number of jobs, you're preparing to be a leader in any of these organizations you decide to work in. All right. What are the common ingredients in all of these positions? And also in terms of being a leader? Well, I would argue the first thing is that you need to know how to think. And if you know how to think, that means you know how to analyze. You know how to interrelate. You know how to compare, how to contrast. The next thing that you need to know is how to handle new situations, how to be flexible. And then after that, you need to know how to communicate. You need to know how to write, and good writing is becoming a very rare skill in our civilization. It's a tragedy, but that's true. You need to know how to speak, and good speaking is not as prevalent as it once was. And then you need to know how to handle mathematical data, to reason quantitatively. Well, a liberal arts education is just made to order to enable you to do these kinds of things. Why do we require a broad range of subjects, for example? So that you are constantly exposed to new things, so you have to handle new disciplines. Why do we emphasize writing? Professors would much rather grade multiple choice exams. We emphasize writing because, first of all, we want you to learn how to write and to write under pressure. And secondly, because we want to see how you express yourselves in terms of ideas. You can take a multiple choice exam and just mark off several things. But you cannot really tell whether a student can relate ideas as well through a multiple choice exam as you can through an essay exam. There just is no comparison. Now, I think the second thing about the liberal arts education is beyond preparing for all of these jobs, you're not going to spend all of your life in your job. In other words, if you think about how you're going to spend your life, the minority of hours in your day are going to be spent at your job. And my suggestion would be to people, well, I would hope you would be interested more than in just going home, sitting in front of TV, and letting someone else do your thinking for you. If you're really going to live the good life, if you're going to have an appreciation for our culture, you've got to have a liberal arts education. Now, it's possible to get it without going to college. Some people do it, but it's much more difficult to do it that way. We all know self-educated people who may not even have finished high school, but it's just more difficult to do. A liberal arts education is really a formalized way to help people find out how to live the rest of their lives and to not only prepare to be educated young men and women, but also to handle a variety of jobs and furthermore to go to the top in these jobs. And this is what our graduates do. Time after time, this is where we find them.
I certainly see your views on leadership, and after talking with you, I can see why you're in the position that you are. In your leadership position, congratulations.
Thank you.
You've been here 4 years. I believe you came in with my class, and now
That's right.
I'll be leaving. And I'd like to know what some of your short-term and long-term goals might be as the president of this university.
Well, all right, let's take some of the short-term goals, because of course you can testify as to whether or not these have been achieved in your 4 years. Well, I think the first concern was to begin to make DePauw more widely known for the excellence of what we're doing here. Some people have said that DePauw was one of the best kept secrets in the Midwest, in the sense that here was a school with an extraordinary tradition, but yet a school which was not perceived as it had been over the years as being really among the top flight schools in terms of kinds of students it was getting, in terms of what its students were doing. And it just wasn't known as it once was. So I think our admissions process has been radically changed, and I think you all can testify to that. Our applications have increased now for 3 years running. The SAT scores of our entering classes are going up. Some people in your class might not have gotten in if they tried to get in at this point in time. I think the second thing that we had to do, we had really not made much progress in terms of the Physical Education Center and in restoring East College. I've heard from people in your class that you were promised a Physical Education Center when you got here.
Exactly, yes.
And so we had about $10 million that we had to find for these two projects, and we got that done, and of course they're underway.
Excuse me, how was that raised, the $10 million? It was through alumni support?
Yeah, this came from alumni and friends. Well, it was raised by asking for it, and I talked to a number of people and convinced them that this is what we needed at this point in time more than anything else, and they decided then to give the money. You don't get it unless you ask for it.
I'm an old fan of Bowman Gym, but believe me, we did need the.
We did need the new
Bowman
Gym was out of date in 1918.
Right.
Now I think the next thing that we had to do, and this would be appreciated, I think, more by people on campus. I was concerned that the morale of the independent students here was not as high as it might be, and that they somehow felt left out, because after all, this is an extraordinarily strong fraternity and sorority school. And I was concerned because I heard some students decided not even to apply at DePauw because of the fear that they might not get into fraternity or sorority. So we somehow had to change the situation for the independent students, but at the same time keeping the fraternities and sororities strong. This was somewhat difficult to do, but I think we've made changes for the independent students. So now that their morale is extremely high, it's just turned around about 180 degrees as far as I can tell. So I think we have a much better situation on campus. I also was concerned that perhaps the cultural life on campus was not as rich and varied as it might be. And I must say we're now getting to the point where we have too many things going on. I just can't attend all of them, and I think people are having to make choices. Now they're saying we have too much going on. Well, I'm delighted to see that. I was also concerned that perhaps we weren't being quite as tough in terms of our academic standards as we perhaps should have been. And I think, again, people can testify that this has changed. We've increased the graduation requirements. You don't have to worry about those, but incoming students do. It's tougher in terms of what we're expecting. I think professors are grading harder. I know that we're requiring higher grade point averages to stay in school. And of course the incoming requirements for incoming students are higher. So I think most of, at least what I felt needed to be done immediately, has been done. Now the question is, what do we need in the long run? Well, frankly, about the only thing we really need is more money for endowment to provide increased scholarship aid for students. That's the only real problem we have. And I must say, I'm glad to say that many schools have much more difficult problems. They also have the problem of financial aid. Because what we have this year is an unprecedented decrease in the amount of aid coming from both the federal and the state government. That's for next year to students. And I think most of us have felt that we had to cut back federal aid in particular because it was getting out of hand, and we had to cut the federal budget because this country cannot continue to run the kinds of deficits we've been running at the federal level because you've got to get that money from somewhere, and then you have to borrow, and then that means an increasing amount of the federal budget every year goes just to pay off interest. But the problem was that the cuts originally proposed in federal aid to education were, I think, disproportionate. Education was being asked to take a much more severe cut than most other areas of the economy. So we're trying to get that back into harmony with what's happening elsewhere, and I think we've made some progress.
I know as far as the cultural standpoint at DePauw, I've been involved with the music department, and our music department is second to none as far as the size of school and the productions that we put on here. That's
right, and for example, our program in theater. It's astounding the productions, the number of productions we have going on, and not only by our communications department, but I was just amazed when I came to DePauw and found, for example, Do's or Do, which has been going as an amateur group for decades, the Collegians, the Men of Note, and I know you're involved with the Men of Note and have been involved with Collegians. I really don't know of any school of this size where you have amateur groups, which almost, I think...
reach the professional level.
That's right, and in spite of the lack of any faculty or administration involvement, and indeed it may be because of that. I think the collegians keep on just out of spite, and the Men of Note too. In other words, the fact that you don't get any aid gives you a special kind of feeling and loyalty to it. An incentive. Because you know that only you can keep it going, and I think that's astounding. And again, a tribute to the extraordinary spirit of and drive and motivation of our students.
President Rosser, I'd really like to thank you for taking your time to be with us on the show today. I know that I've learned a lot about the liberal arts education, and I'm sure that the viewing audience has as well.
My pleasure.
Thank you. This concludes our Outlook series for the 1980-81 series. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Matt Patterson, and I was your host. We'd like to thank, especially one more time, President Rosser for being with us. Have a good day.
This has been Outlook, a student production of DePauw University. Our guest today has been President of DePauw University, Dr. Richard Rosser. The host was Matt Patterson. Producer was Diane Chase. Camera work was by Nancy Schilling. Graphics by Amy Emmert. Music cueing by Tracy Cochran. Floor manager was Sue Tuller. Director was Liz Wright. Production assistants were Karen Doty, Marisa Ellis, and Allison Foster, all under the supervision of Dr. James Elrod. This is Nancy Ball, thanking you for joining us today for our last program of the 1980-81 season of Outlook.